Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well today. So glad to be here. Thank you, Rory. This is episode 151. Thank you for joining us on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Our usual format is we have 3 topics that we will be discussing within our podcast, and today is, of course, no exception. We're starting off with topic number 1, where we'll be looking at how one would work with conflicting ethical frameworks. I think an interesting topic. If you're a student, you'd need to write about this in your assignments, but if you're out and practicing as a practitioner, there are times you may come into contact with those conflicting frameworks, so we'll be looking a little deeper into that. And then, Rory, our check-in with CPCAB this week, you spoke with Heather Price about why a student might graduate a level 4 course, be, I guess, in practice, and then want to top up, the reasons why one would maybe top up from a level 4 to a level 5.
Yes, we caught up with the fab Heather Price, and she outlined the benefits of doing a level 5 course to prepare you for private practice, and what you need to understand and get a kind of sense of, and maybe things you learn that you don't learn in your level 4 course.
Like it. Looking forward to that one. And we end episode 151 by dipping our toe into practice matters. This is where we look at practitioners in practice and what you may come up against. And there's a lecture, Rory, that was recently added to our CPD library. And you did an interview with the lecturer, and that is Lisa Cromar. And of course, the topic is counselling autistic clients.
Absolutely. Neurodiversity is coming of age now. It's now well recognised that not everybody sees the world in the same way we do. That's something, of course, that people who study counselling realise. But there are some people who have very unique views of the world. And as a consequence, we have to understand how to work with them. So Lisa outlined how to work with autistic people, which is the correct term of addressing someone who's on the autistic spectrum, and also very creative ways of working with neurodiversity. Fascinating interview, and I have to say, a must-see lecture.
Not to be missed. So let's start with our first topic today, which is conflicting ethical frameworks, Rory.
Yes, this comes up at least once a year in our Facebook page, and if you're not a member of our Facebook page, type Facebook, go into Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, and you'll find our page. And if you just ask to enter, it's a closed group, just ask to enter. Of course, we'll let you in, and you'll see thousands of like-minded people, some counsellors, some students, lots of students, trainers, supervisors, all interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And this question comes up every single year, mainly, I think, because it's on one of the exam board's criteria. How do you work with competing ethical frameworks? And it happens a lot. If you're a school counsellor, you'll have your school code of practice, and you'll also have your ethical framework, depending on which ethical body you're with. And sometimes they conflict, Ken, and it can cause practitioners a real headache. Well, which framework do I abide by? Do I abide by, shall we say, the school's code of practice and safeguarding, or do I abide by my ethical framework? And it really, really can cause a lot of difficulty. And I think that one of the ways to get around that, of course, is the contract. You can blend 2 frameworks together as long as the information, the limits of confidentiality are in the contract, and the client understands the limits of confidentiality, then all is good. And the reason I suspect it's put in as a assignment question is because it comes up time and time again. And I know that you were a school counsellor for a time, Ken, and you must have come across this yourself.
Indeed, Rory. And I remember kind of starting that contracting, or that kind of examining how we might work with that with the actual staff at the college that I was working at, speaking about it, laying before them. They weren't counsellors, although they kind of oversaw that there was provision for counsellor. And I needed to sit down and really explain to them that there were two different, as you say, kind of frameworks that we would be working to and blending together, and we needed to negotiate how that would be done. And then that was, of course, taken into the contract that was presented to the clients as they arrived, so that they fully understood how the working was done. And I guess looking at it, there are some non-negotiables. So if you look to legislation, the legislation will definitely be written into an ethical body's ethical framework. So reasons to break confidentiality. So here in the UK, that would be money laundering, drugs trafficking. So that there are a number of reasons why we have to break confidentiality, and that's mandated. We don't get a choice in that. It's a must do. But there are also parts of an ethical framework, and I'm just using the BACP here as an example, where there are many parts where we will strive to. So it's not mandated. It's kind of there's a looseness around that. So I guess it's about taking the two ethical frameworks and finding the non-negotiables in both. And you spoke about working maybe with children, or maybe working substance misuse, where you will have very good reasons for having additional reasons that you would need to break confidentiality over and above legislation for the well-being of the client, I guess, and the safety of the group they may be in if they're in a group setting in rehabilitation. But to make it easy, Rory, you've made a handout easier. You've made a handout on this as well. So I just want to outline that at the beginning. Rory's made one of his super duper handouts on conflicting ethical frameworks. Wow, the tongue got tied up in that. Conflicting ethical frameworks. And to get that, just go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our website. Find the podcasts tab. Click on episode 151. You'll find this episode. You'll find all of the show notes, we call them, of what we've spoken about today, with any kind of links to additional information. But from that very page, you can download Rory's super duper handout on conflicting ethical frameworks. You yourself, Rory, have worked with conflicting ethical frameworks.
I have, and one of the things in the handout is I will cite some examples of where you may have to adapt your way of working to the agency you work with. And you're absolutely right, Ken, there are non-negotiables, and the non-negotiables are the law. Everybody has to obey the law. But one I came across many years ago was I had a student who had a placement in a drugs rehabilitation unit for people who are with substance misuse. And part of the contract they had with the clients was if the client declared they'd use any street or illicit drugs, they had to break confidentiality. And I know the students in question was kind of pulling themselves apart and saying, well, I'm not sure about this, Rory. And I said, well, find out why that is in the contract. That will give you some understanding of why they feel it's so important. And the reason was that if someone is using heroin, which is a drug that reduces your heartbeat and heart rate, and if they're using heroin and they're on a prescription, if they're coming off heroin, they may be on methadone or some other form of drugs that helps take the cravings away, and they use street drugs as well, what can happen is that people can die. It's as simple as that. They can have a heart attack. Heroin is an analgesic, and as such, it lowers heart rate, and sometimes it stops people's hearts, And that was the reason for the addition to confidentiality that could be broken. And I think that it's usually, in my experience, when frameworks conflict, it's about the levels of confidentiality. And that is always addressed in the contract. As long as it's in the contract and the client knows, then the client can take an informed choice whether they want to break confidentiality. It's the same for people in prisons. Things like contraband or illegal activities may very well have a contract which says if you disclose this, I have to break confidentiality. So that is the way you work with conflicting ethical frameworks. And you're absolutely right, Ken. Some are must do's. There's no negotiating about that. You ethically have to do things, and some are, it would be nice if, and those are the areas where there's a little bit more wiggle room. And the other area, which is quite an interesting one, and I'm thinking of the National Counselling Society, which says that you must take notes. In some women's refuges, I know a few therapists who don't take notes because they cannot be subpoenaed. So it becomes quite an interesting position ethically, and sometimes you have to stand behind your views, and you have to stand behind your client in terms of what's best for them. But every single year it comes up on the syllabus, and every single year students struggle with it because we're given the impression, of course, that the one code of ethics is overriding everything. Well, it does to a point, but you have to work with the codes of practice of the organisation you work with.
100%, and it can be tricky, and it gets to its trickiest when something comes into question within therapy. So 12 sessions in, and something comes up. That's when it becomes tricky to kind of back out of balancing the two requirements, the two frameworks as they are. It's about looking and understanding those frameworks. First off, taking the time to read them. So if you're joining an agency, read through everything and make sure you fully understand it. And what you don't understand, question, inquire, get more information on. As we went into this, I mentioned my counselling within a college. And before I had any client-facing time, I'd read through all of their framework, their policies, their procedure, what they required from me. And I sat down with their staff to inquire, ask questions before, so that I could get clarity myself before going into practice. And of course, at the time of that, when I was working in the college, I was a member of the BACP. So I was working also to the BACP ethical framework, which I had also read and understood. So I was able to kind of ask questions before something came up. And I think that is what is important here, is to look at it. And when you get a massive conflict, and you've just mentioned one, Rory, where one framework will say you have to take notes, and you'll be working in an agency where they will say, we do not want you taking notes because it could, if leaked out, endanger the presenting client group. Then you have an ethical dilemma. And when you have those ethical dilemmas, go to the ethical body, and they should have somebody in an ethics team that should be able to help you, and ask them what you should do. Take it to supervision. And whatever the decision that is made, make sure that you have evidenced in writing what measures you took, what questions you asked, and what the outcome of that was, so that, again, those 12 sessions in, if something should be questioned, you have defendable decision making, in that you can evidence why you have taken the stance you have.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, it's a great question to have on a syllabus of work from an awarding body, because it really does link to real world work. When I've worked for agencies, there's always been some exception or some area of the agency where I've had to adapt the ethical framework to work with the agency, quite ethically, I have to say, and that lives in the contract. And the answer to the question on the syllabus, the question in the syllabus, is that it lives in the contract. As long as your contract clearly states that you're going to take a form of action if something happens, and it's always around confidentiality, usually always about confidentiality, then you're covered. Of course, if you had a code of practice that said we tell everybody everything, then of course you may want to think about if you want to work for that agency. And I would also ask people to look up the Caldecott principles, because where confidentiality is involved, the Caldecott principles of information sharing are just so important, because you could share relevant information. Say for instance, a client has said that they're going to take their own lives, and you work for an agency, and the agency states that harm to self or harm to others is an exception to confidentiality. Then you just state that the client's got a plan, they're in the process of acting out this plan. You don't have to tell anybody at the agency what else has been discussed with the client. It's just the clear and present danger you need to address. And that's the first part. So if you're not familiar with Caldecott principles, it's here in the UK, but I think it's a good working benchmark for anywhere in the world if you're working in therapy. Have a look at that, and that would really, really guide you.
Definitely. Interesting topic. One for much debate. If you want to join in the debate, get onto that Facebook page. Facebook, Counselling Tutor. Come and join the page. Come and join the discussion. And of course, don't forget to go and download Rory's super duper handout on this by going to counsellingtutor.com, clicking on the podcast tab, episode 151. Wow, we've done 151, Rory. No wonder my voice is so croaky. And then go onto that page and download your super duper handout. Moving into our check-in with CPCAB, why one would top up to a level 5, Rory?
Well, it's really interesting. We've always said that when people graduate at level 4, they are qualified counsellors, and that would be true. You can join an ethical body. You can advertise yourself as a practitioner. I think the interesting thing is that going into private practice, as we both know, is a real step change from working in an agency. And there are things certainly around assessment. Both myself and Ken were quite fortunate because Ken worked as an intake manager for addiction services. I worked in mental health for a long time as a support worker. And also I worked with NECRO. I was a support worker for people who come through the criminal justice system. So it gave me a really good, solid background in assessment. But for a lot of people who have just finished their qualification and have worked in an agency, they've got no experience of assessing clients, and assessing clients to making sure that you're working within your competence is so important. And Heather tells us why that level 5 qualification is useful and what it covers.
Let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we welcome Heather Price from CPCAB. And you're going to share with us the benefits or the thoughts about moving to a level 5 course after graduating from level 4.
Yes, that's right. Hi, Rory. I think it's tempting to think as a student that once you've got your level 4, then that's it. You're qualified, end of training, you needn't do any more. But actually, the opposite seems to be true, because it's almost like that's just the beginning, and you've got your basic qualification. And having worked for a while with clients, you probably begin to realise you want something else now, a little bit different. And I think there's perhaps 3 different things that students, trainees, qualified counsellors might want to go on to do. You might want to specialise. So, for example, CPCAB have got a CBT qualification at level 5. And you might feel that having worked for, say, probably at least a year, you feel you do want to specialise, and that might be the way that you want to go to take a CBT qualification, which would be at level 5. You may feel that you're ready now to go into independent practice or private practice. And although there are no legalities stopping you just doing that, CPCAB's PCL5 is very much geared towards setting up your own private practice, what you need to do, the boundaries around that, help and support that you can get, and managing a practice.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of considerations when one's setting up in private practice, and a part of that is, of course, things like assessing clients. How to do referrals, how to do core assessments and use core assessments. Yeah. And also the practical things like paying your taxes, registering with the ICO. There's all that kind of thing. So what would be covered in a level 5 course that maybe not covered in a level 4 one?
I guess not quite so much on the business side, although that would be touched on, but more about the things that we've just both mentioned there, the boundaries of working in independent practice, and definitely how do you assess clients? Because if you're in an agency, there will be somebody else who assesses their suitability for counselling, whereas clearly in independent practice, you could get anybody with any issue straight off the street, as it were. So you do need to know how to assess people for their suitability for counselling, and also do a risk assessment so that you're going to be safe with that person. So that's really important. And also to know where to refer them if actually they're not going to be suitable for your practice for whatever reason. It's useful to have contacts that you can refer people on to. So on the level 5, on the PCL5, students would learn how to do all of those things, how to keep their own records, how to maybe do reports for example, some people work for employee assistance schemes, so they might want reports from the work that you've done with a client. So there would be some work around that on the PCL5, how to set up, how to advertise, how to keep yourself safe, all those things really.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot to be taken into consideration, and I know from my own experience when I moved from working in an agency and then went into private practice, I was an experienced therapist. I was a lecturer for about 8 or 9 years at that point. I'd had a business background, but there were certain things that really surprised me. I remember, for example, having to go to the therapy room and do an assessment on whether it would be the room I rent, whether it would be suitable for clients. Did it have wheelchair access? Did it have a fire escape? Asking the questions about, do you have public liability insurance?
Yeah. Are there toilets? That kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So all of those things, would be looked at on the PCL5. And things that students don't always think about, taking money. If they've worked in an agency, they might not have ever been involved in taking money from clients because perhaps somebody else does that. So it's then, how do you charge? What are your rates? How do you cope with cancellations? Do you give money back? Do you not give money back? If a client says at the end of the session, I haven't brought my purse or my wallet, I can't pay today. All those things are really worth thinking about, because they're not things you necessarily have to think about when you're in an agency setting at level 4.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with you. And of course, for people in private practice, it is how they make their living. It's their bread and butter, as we say here in the north of England. And as such, you have to be very realistic. If you are in private practice and you're making your living from it, you charge clients, and that links into things like your contract, your cancellation policies, all that type of thing. Would that kind of thing be covered on a level 5 course?
Yes, it would. Yeah. I mean, different tutors and different centres can run the PCL5 in their own particular way, although they will have had approval from us. And some centres choose to ask the students to set up like a mock independent practice. So they get all those procedures in place and their policies in place, and their advertising and so on, and actually give it a name, just as if they were starting their own real practice, so that they can go through a lot of these issues before they're actually starting an independent practice.
It sounds like a really good idea because, I was very fortunate when I started up. I'd had a lot of external influences that gave me quite a good grounding and allowed me to set up in private practice. But one of the things that I had to think long and hard about was ethical referrals. You need that in place. You need your little referral book in place before you see clients, really. You can't say, I'll come back to you in a week.
No, absolutely. You need to know where to go and where to advise them to go, or maybe have a written list. That might be quite acceptable. Yeah. So all those things would be covered, yeah.
Yeah, and also I think, you made a point earlier about assessment. That's a real skill in itself. I worked in mental health. I worked in the criminal justice system. I've been around the block a few times, and I've done modules on assessing clients. But it's a real skill, because you may get clients who come to you and you find very quickly you're out of your skill set, you're out of your depth, and you need to think. You need to be able to clinically think, don't you, in advance before you take a client on.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yes. And I think it's quite tempting early on to take anybody and everybody, because you want to get started and you want the money. And then there are those ethical balances around, should I take this person because really perhaps I don't feel comfortable or quite competent, but I really need to get my business started and I need the money. So yeah, all of those things come into play, sadly. And like you said, the room, where am I going to do this? Is it a room at home, but the family troop through this room, or there might be washing hanging up, or is there a separate entrance or not? And, all these things are really worth thinking about. So they are all covered on the PCL5. It's a good course in that respect. And students going on to it need to be in an agency, or already they might have started in independent practice, but they need to have the opportunity to assess clients so they can practice this whilst on the course.
Well, I think that's a fabulous observation. How long is the duration of the course? So how long would it usually run for?
It's a year, so it's half the time of a level 4 diploma. It's get this right, I think it's 120 guided learning hours. So most centres would run it over a year, of perhaps an evening a week or an afternoon or whatever. I think one of the other things about going on to a level 5 is that for anyone who's interested in doing the Open University Foundation degree, either of those level 5s can give you entry onto the Open University Foundation degree without having to do quite so many modules through the OU. So that might be another thing to think about if anyone is looking in that direction. And of course, other level 5s, like we've got a number of centres who run what we call tailor-made courses. And quite often a lot of those are at level 5. And they tend to be specialisms like working with children, sex addiction, just different specialisms like that people might find they want to go into when they've been working for a while.
Well, I think that's been a real useful observation. And I also think that it just gives the idea that our practices grow and we learn, and it's non-stop. We just don't stop when we get that diploma through our letterbox on a sunny August afternoon, or whenever the post person comes. That's just the beginning, and specialism is the field that people would go into to be able to develop their practices, and with that gain extra qualifications. So Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Well, it's always a pleasure to hear her talk, and she speaks so succinctly about the things that you don't learn on your level 4 course. That's the basis of it. The whole thing is what you don't cover on the level 4 course, and it's about starting in private practice. So if you're thinking of going into private practice and you're a bit unsure, maybe a level 5 course is for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And moving on to our final topic for episode 151. This is our section called Practice Matters. And today we're going to be looking at counselling autistic clients. You hooked up with one of our lecturers from our CPD library, Lisa Cromar, to discuss this very important topic.
It's a very important topic because more and more people now are being seen as neurodiverse. And by neurodiverse, I mean that we see the world in a different way. You've noticed I use the term "we" because I'm neurodiverse. I have dyslexia, so I see things in a different way. I've always seen things in a different way to other people, and I think it's really important that when we work with clients, we understand that diversity. Some clients may have low attention, other clients may need different forms of materials to work with. May have struggle communicating in what we would consider, and I'm inverting my commas here as I say the word normal. Lisa tells us about the techniques that you can use when you're working with autistic people. And an interesting podcast, but a fascinating lecture.
I look forward to listening to it right now. Let's get straight into Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
And it's my great pleasure to welcome Lisa Cromar, who is a therapist who has a specialism working with people with autism. And I'd like to start by just talking about how we address people who are autistic, because I made a faux pas and said someone's autistic, and there's now a kind of view of how you would address somebody or think about someone with autism, isn't there?
Indeed, yes. So generally the autistic kind of community prefer the I am autistic rather than person with autism. Surveys have been done to find out what we preferred, basically, so that when people are writing about it in academia or in the social networks, that the right terminology is used. So there's been a lot of surveys done, but around 60 to 70% of autistic people say they prefer to be called I'm an autistic person. So there are obviously then 30-40% who don't prefer that. Yes. So it's always best if you're working with someone that you just check in with them as what they individually prefer. But if you're doing any kind of academic writing, the preference is to say autistic person.
Well, I mean, I think that's very, very useful to understand how we address people, because I guess that is not only a way of being respectful, but also I think that's about professional competence, understanding how to work with people from a community, a different community. So what are the challenges that an autistic client may have in terms of coming to therapy?
Well, the challenges can kind of start even before they get there. So the fact that picking up a telephone and making a phone call can be quite stressful for an autistic person. Talking on the phone, a lot of us find really difficult. So as a therapist, it's always good to at least offer to do it via email or text. So that's kind of before you even meet them, there's that to consider. But actually in the therapy room, there can be quite big distractions in a therapy room. The classic is the ticking clock. So wherever I work with other people and other counsellors or services that provide counselling, my advice to them is always get in those counselling rooms and make sure there's no ticking clocks in there. We are affected by sensory overload. So we see brighter, we hear louder, noises have more of an effect on our entire body. So the counselling room, that's what we're going to notice. We're going to notice if it's a bit cluttered, if there's any kind of funny noises, like if there's a computer whirring. And if we've got those kind of noises happening, it's going to be difficult for us to concentrate on actual counselling. So the environment is really important to think about. Actually talking can be difficult too. A lot of us might be perfectly verbal when we're relaxed. I'm quite verbal when I'm relaxed and can come across quite articulately. If I'm highly anxious, I become completely non-verbal, which probably is quite hard to believe when I'm in my articulate stage. So don't think that you've got a client that's coming in here into your room and can talk really well, that they're always going to be that way. So it's always good to just have that in mind and to just back off a bit if they seem to have lost their words. Maybe give them a bit of space so that they can kind of calm down a bit, or have sensory toys they can play with just to calm that anxiety down. If they have significant issues with verbalization, then creative tools where you might provide lists of feeling words. I have some buttons that have got feeling words on them. If when I start working with them, that seems to be that it's going to be an issue, that they are going to struggle to find words, then we might use buttons instead. They'll have access to lots of words on buttons, and we'll kind of talk through some issues, and they'll have access to those if they need a little bit of help. There's something called alexithymia, which means no words for feelings, and a high percentage of people with autism suffer from that too. So you might know you felt something, actually knowing what the word is to describe that can be almost impossible, whereas those words being there can help you just find it.
Yeah, so almost like people can get sensory overload. And I have a friend who is autistic, or he's an autistic person, should I say? And he would tell me that if he's in a room, it's very hard to differentiate between the sounds of people talking and what I'm saying, and it's almost like where I can just filter out people talking, he can't. And it's the same if there's a car alarm outside his home when we're talking. Again, he really struggles to filter that out.
That's exactly right. Some people have described it like similar to people who have to have hearing aids. So with hearing aids, they can't, all sounds sound the same because it's not tapping into the part of the brain that knows which noise is important. So we just hear things at all of the same level. So yes, I get that. If I'm in a room, say I'm in a crowded room, a crowded hall or something, there's lots of people there, and I'm in a small group within that room, the conversations that are on the other table are just as loud as the conversation I'm trying to have with the person right in front of me, or a cafe. They're really stressful places to be for me because, oh my goodness, coffee percolators drive me insane because that's all I can hear. I can't, and it's like the person that's in front of me has gone completely mute. It's really hard. So yeah, in the counselling room, absolute silence is golden.
Yes, and remove anything that may be visually distracting as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, well, I think those are really useful observations. Now, obviously, in the time we're at, there's a lot of people doing online counselling, telephone counselling, text counselling, and you said that it may not suit an autistic person to work on the phone specifically.
Yes.
So would video be better, like we're using now? We're using Zoom to record this.
Yeah, video would be better, or maybe a combination of video and text. The way Zoom you can have comments running as well. I mean, in the therapy room, actually, I sometimes work with clients who really do shut down verbally, and we sometimes go so far as both getting our phones out and texting each other until they calm down again, or they might text me what they're trying to say, and then I will verbalize back to them, and then that kind of gets it going again. But if it's something really difficult that just can't get it into words, that technology is really useful for that. So I think that could work quite well as well in combination on the Zoom type services. Yes,
I think that is really valuable information, because it's not the first thing we'd think about when working with a client, to get our phones out and text them if they were sat in front of us. But it goes to show how we need to, and I say we because I've heard you say we in terms of being an autistic person, non-neurotypical people like myself need to be thoughtful that we may have to be very creative in the therapy room.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do a lot of creative work in the therapy room, and that stuff's laid out the whole time. So there'll always be a pen and paper there. At the bare minimum, there'll be pen and paper next to the person. So either I can go to visual or they can go to visual. Sometimes it's just easier when we're talking about something. I'll just start drawing. I'll just start writing, because it goes in a lot better with some autistic people, and I can include myself in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just so helpful, because it does mean that we have to adapt our therapeutic approach. And I say we, therapists may be listening to this, have to adapt their therapeutic approach. And already you've given us two really concrete examples. One by texting, the other by having at the minimum paper and a pen. I mean, the things like creative materials like clay is useful, and paints and that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something I've used myself yet. I've been to plenty of creative counselling sessions and meetings, especially the Creative Counsellors Club do lots of stuff like that I go along to learn different things like clay therapy, and sort of feeling cards. You can get cards that have got different feelings on them as well. But yeah, it's so individual. So if I had a client that came in and particularly enjoyed something, say they particularly enjoyed clay work, then absolutely I would suggest getting something like that. And if I thought it was going to help, I have a Jenga set that's got lots of prompts on it. So in the early stages, if they are struggling to build a relationship with me, because of not really feeling like they can talk easily, they're feeling anxious, that can just lighten the mood a little bit, and it helps us get to know each other a bit. But those prompts often lead to something else. A self-actualization kicks in, even if the prompt had nothing to do with what they end up talking about, which is just like therapy, isn't it? You start talking about one thing, and the thing that needs to come to the front comes to the front. So one of my prompts is, who would you not like to be stuck in a lift with? I mean, you wouldn't think that was particularly on the surface very therapeutic, but it is. Then it's getting them thinking about somebody that's on their mind. But as I say, even that one can go in a completely different direction. Thinking, how did we get from there to there? But the stuff that needs to come out will come out if they're relaxed enough and they're able to verbalize. And the best chance they've got of being able to verbalize is by having those sorts of tools in place and by being relaxed and not having the pressure of verbalization. That's the worst thing.
So I guess the lesson I'm going to take away from this is that being creative, being thoughtful, really seeing someone else's frame of reference, literally walking in someone else's shoes, is just really important. But I guess you have to know what shoes you're walking in. And you've done an incredible lecture for us, like for Counsellor CPD, on working with autistic people. And that's a whole hour. In 10 minutes, we really can't capture the whole of that. But you've given us some really brilliant insights. If you had one observation to leave people with when working with autistic people, what would it be?
One observation?
Yeah, or one tip, maybe.
Relationship. Do whatever it takes to build that relationship. And all the things I've spoken about today are about building a relationship. Get the trust, and it's going to possibly take longer than you're used to.
I think that is a beautiful way of finishing this. We're so grateful for your time. I've seen the lecture. It's absolutely fabulous. So, Lisa Cromar, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Rory. It's important information. It needs to be heard. This is a topic very dear to myself. I've mentioned this on our podcast before. I am an autistic person, and I only found out that I am autistic in my 50s. I lived my whole life having struggles that I didn't fully understand. And now I fully understand them. And neurodiversity, I think, is of age at this time, Rory. It is being encouraged that we come out and celebrate our neurodiversity. Because back in my day, when I was at school, I was labeled as lazy, fidgety, no concentration, not trying hard enough, and it wasn't recognized. It wasn't the right time, the right age. What a great time we live in, where we can celebrate our neurodiversity. And for myself, Rory, with me being an autistic man, if there was a big red button that I could push and make it disappear, I would not push it, because I am thankful for my autism, and that it kind of serves me in so many ways. And yeah, sure, there are some challenges, but the world is becoming a lot more understanding of what those challenges are. And I guess in doing CPD, watching lectures like Lisa's lecture, we kind of become more informed.
I absolutely can, and it comes down to diversity. It's that one word, diversity, that not everybody sees the world the same. And people need help. And if you can understand how to help people and how best to support someone who doesn't see the world in the same frame of reference as you do, I think that's a great thing. But what a interesting mix of topics today in the podcast. We started off by talking about conflicting ethical frameworks, that gnarly topic of how to work within 2 codes of practice. We spoke with Heather Price about topping up to a level 5 course. And then, of course, we finished with counselling autistic clients with Lisa Cromar, a very eclectic mix. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and hey, look after each other.
And before we check out on this episode 151, don't forget, if you would like to watch Lisa's lecture, you can catch that in our CPD library, and all the information of how to join that are coming up right now. If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.